The world can seem upside down at times, which has set me on a journey in search for love, truth, and ultimately personal freedom. I'm on a mission to help people find peace and healing so that each of us as individuals and ultimately the collective can be free from whatever keeps us stuck and skews our view of just how beautiful this life can be. Welcome to the Mack Show. Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to another episode of the Mack Show. I am Mack. Thank you for joining me. Guys, this episode is really cool. For me, I got to talk to my brother, Jeremy White, and we have a very honest and open discussion about seeking truth wherever we may find it, all past. His story about becoming or starting out as an atheist to where he is today, and then my story about starting deeply into the religious world and ending up where I am today. We share our stories, and this episode is beautiful. I love this brother. He is a truth seeker. He's a good man, husband, father, friend, brother. He's just a good dude. And so really excited for you all to hear this episode. I hope it blesses you. I hope it encourages you. It may challenge you. And all those things are very good. For in the end, as it says in Proverbs, as iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. So may you all be sharpened, and count you all friends. Without further delay, here's the episode. All right, brothers and sisters, like I just mentioned, really excited to have my brother Jeremy on. Jeremy is, like I mentioned in the intro, one of the very few in my life where when he sends me stuff, I go down as deep a rabbit hole as he will send me. I think vice versa. This man is a truth seeker, and not afraid to overturn any stone. Nothing sacred. There's no sacred cows that can't be looked at. And so, brother, I'm so excited to have you on. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Dude, first of all, what a journey. You and I both come from very different places, and then we align, in time. We find ourselves both in Texas, both in North Texas.
Yeah.
But why don't you share your journey? Because I think it's incredible, quite frankly,
Yeah.
someone to come from with your background and such an intensity of your background to now where you are.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with you on that one. I've told my story a lot to many people, anyone who will listen, because I do believe that, God finds people, and, once you connect to the source, you have a different life. And so I grew up in the Boston, Massachusetts area.
Mm.
And my mom was Catholic, my father was Jewish, and we didn't, like my brother and I, we didn't really go through, any sort of traditional kind of religious upbringing. I think as a result of that, we kind of, we lit the menorah with, my dad at Hanukkah. We didn't really celebrate. We got a couple of gifts, and we celebrated Christmas with my mom and the broader family up in the Massachusetts area. Most of my dad's family was like, passed away or, kind of had moved away.
Mm.
And so I kind of grew up like, I remember, when I was younger, my mom had asked my brother and I if we wanted to go to CCD,
Hmm. Yep.
and
Which is
kind of
Catholic
Catholic
confirmation.
confirmation,
Yeah.
whatever it is. And
Yeah.
and we were emphatically like, no, no, we're not doing this.
Yeah.
And I don't know why that was, but like I just didn't feel like doing it. And when you're a kid, you don't want to like, I want to go to school on Sunday in addition to going to school all week. And so I grew up like not believing in God, basically,
Mm.
is the net of it. I never really had a point of view on it, other than, I always tell people I always grew up not believing that God or Satan, or the devil or anything were real, but I believed in man's obsession with both, because
Mm.
I had seen so many different religions and so many different, points of view on who God is, what God means. And, I was like, you see all this imagery on like movies and TV, and you're like, oh, this is all good entertainment, but like, is any of this real? Like, this
Yeah.
didn't feel real to me. And so I grew up really not believing in any of it. Um, and then kind of went through my life. I'd been in really bad like car accidents. I got hit by a car on my, a minivan while I was on my bike in sixth grade. I probably should have died, but I survived it.
Mm,
Got in a really bad car wreck 9 days after I got my license and totaled my mom's station wagon. Another
wow.
friend of mine, I was driving him home from school. I hit some black ice. I spun out and wrecked the car. If there were a car coming the other way, we'd definitely probably, I'm guessing we would have been dead.
Wow.
Because we did a 720 spin like down the road and ended up hitting a tree, blew out all the windows. It was a pretty bad car wreck, and I walked away like completely fine from it.
Mm,
Both of us did. And I just never thought anything of like, someone's watching over me or someone wants me to be alive for something in the future. It just to me, I just kind of brushed it off like, man, I got real lucky.
mm,
Um, and was in another car accident as I got older. I mean, I've been in a few like pretty bad car wrecks, as well as some other like accidents and things. And going through college, I was a partier. I was in a fraternity, always drinking, smoking weed, doing some drugs and dabbling and things like that.
mhm,
And then got out of college and kind of was in the club scene pretty heavy. And many times I think I probably would have um not been here. You know what I mean? There are
yeah.
probably some many times I probably shouldn't be here. But I am. And I got older, a little wiser. Met my wife, my beautiful wife, Christy, and she, kind of changed things for me. I kind of got out of all of it. Like I fell in love with her immediately, and
Mm,
something just drew me to her. Um, and it wasn't that she was just like attractive and I wanted to hook up with her. It was like something drew me to her. Like we had a connection. I felt we had a connection. And she was kind of like coming off a relationship and was like, nah, whatever. And
mm,
but I was just drawn to her, and I just kind of knew I'm like, she's the one, for something is just like drawing me to her.
mm,
And I tell you all this because she's the reason I came to Texas.
mm,
Like we got married in Boston, had our first couple of kids up there. And then she's like, I want to move back to New Jersey where she was from to be closer to her family. So we went and lived in New Jersey for 8 years and we were there for a few years. And she was like, if your job ever takes you out of New Jersey, I'm game. Like we'll go wherever. And fast forward 6 or 7 years, and she's like, we got a letter from the superintendent of schools, and the governor of New Jersey was like going to repurpose our tax dollars from our town, the town that we hand selected because of the school systems and all that.
wow. Yeah.
And we knew the programs were going to get cut. We saw the writing on the wall. We're like, property taxes are going to go up. The money's not going to get repurposed to our schools. We're going to end up, losing money on the house if we stay here long. So she's like, I want to move. And I said, okay, where do you want to move? And she's like, I want to move to Texas. And I was like, we'd never been to Texas. I had heard of Texas. I was a gun guy. So I was like, okay, like Texas sounds great. Um,
Yeah.
and so she did all the work, found the like place to live and all that stuff. And we sold our house in New Jersey and we built
Mm,
a house in Texas, North Texas, and moved here 5 years ago. And right around that time, Trump was in office and, all the Q stuff was going on. And like,
yeah.
there's all this like things that were just happening and all this like great awakening was starting to happen. And I was like kind of paying attention to it, but like not like super into it.
Mm,
Um, until like a lot of people, the 2020 election
yeah.
came and went,
Yeah.
and that woke me up to a lot of stuff like COVID and all of that. And my wife's an RN by trade. Um, and she was like, nothing, this doesn't sound right, and this doesn't smell right, and something's weird. And then,
Mm,
the vaccine push came, and she's like, we're not doing this. And my company was like, at the time, my company was trying to push us to it.
yeah.
And I'm in software sales, so like they're like, you can't go visit customers unless you're vaccinated. And I'm like, then I guess I'm not traveling. I'm just
Yeah.
gonna work from home. And I fought it every step of the way. I
Yeah.
was blessed to have a handful of sales reps on my team that none of them wanted to be vaccinated either. So I
Mm,
kind of like ran cover for them, and
that's
we
cool.
we still did a great job as a team and hit our number and all that stuff. But during that process, I had started to go down
Yeah.
all the rabbit holes, like you said at the intro. I mean, I'm a truth seeker, and it just kind of like it was like kind of like I was being pulled to Christie. I was being pulled to kind of like seek truth, like what is
Mm.
going on in this world, like why are we experiencing what we're experiencing, and why are we being treated this way
Yeah.
as human beings, right? Like we should be helping one another. We should be loving one another. Like this just doesn't sound right to me anymore. It just and I really that's when I really started paying attention.
Mm.
And I remember I was in my bathroom doing my normal, morning ritual as I call it, where I kind of like stand in front of the red light panels and I, get my cells energized and I read. Or I watch like, some stuff on YouTube or Telegram or whatever. I'll catch a video that's of interest to me,
Yeah.
and I was going down the SRA rabbit hole,
Mm.
and that's kind of what really flipped it for me. Something just snapped in my brain, and I was like, man, if this stuff's real, which it is, I'm like, this stuff
Yep.
is happening, and so there are people out there that really are worshiping evil
Yep.
and doing evil things, and if that's the case, evil can't have created good, because why would it?
Right.
Means good had to have created evil in some form or fashion, or allowed man through free will to create evil. And so I'm like, that sounds to me like the Bible.
Mm.
And so I started to consider the existence of God. And I was like, you know what? I think I might believe that there's a God. And so I
Mm.
was sitting on the couch with Christy, and I looked at her one night and I said, hey, I got to tell you something. And she's like, what? And I'm like, I think I might be starting to believe that there's a God. And she knew, like, she had been going to, church when we moved to Texas, and trying to
Wow.
find like a non-denominational, church, because she grew up in a Catholic church and, didn't really buy into the whole like
Right.
business of religion per se.
Yeah.
Um, and she's like, okay, tell me more. And she like hopped up on the couch next to me and was like, all right, talk to me. And so I just started explaining to her some things and like that I was feeling. And she bought me for Christmas that year. She bought me The Case for Christ by Lee
Yeah.
Strobel,
Yep.
which is a great book.
Yep.
And that kind of, and I put it on my bookshelf with, 100 other books that I
Sure.
want to read. And I kind of let it sit there and collect dust for a little while. And then we went on vacation. We were planning on going vacation for spring break that year. And meanwhile, one of the guys that worked for me, who lives out in Atlanta and goes to Passion City Church, where what's his name? The guy who wrote Don't Let the Devil, Louis
Mm.
Giglio.
Okay.
So he's the pastor there, and he's written a bunch of books. And I knew he was like, a devout Christian, and I had asked him some questions, and I, kind of started talking to him, and he also knew I was atheist, like
Mm.
he because we had some conversations before. And um he was like, man, I'm so happy for you, brother. Like, he started like really leaning into me. And um a week later, after he and I had this conversation, I get a package in the mail from him, and it was a copy of the NIV, the Jesus Bible,
Uh-huh.
um, and a book that was called 30 Days to Understanding the Bible. And
Mm.
so it was like a short book. You read like one chapter a day. And like, man, I tell you, I read that book in like a weekend.
Mm.
And I was like, I got to figure out how to read the Bible and like understand it. And like, cause I committed to myself that I was going to read the Bible at that
Yeah.
point.
That's cool.
And in one year, I read the Bible. It's a study Bible, cover to cover, every note, every footnote, every comment, every intro, outro, you name it. I
Yep.
kind of studied the Bible over the course of a year. And I got through it in about 11 months. But I was really like compelled to read it and understand it, because I was like, all right, the truth is going to start here,
Yeah.
for me. Like
Mm.
that's where the truth's going to start.
Mm.
Because if I can understand that, then I can go down other rabbit holes and try to figure out like what's real, what's not real. Is
Right.
everything in the Bible real? Or are there things that like are just stories that are repurposed or retold over time? And who knows, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so I did that, and then as I was embarking on reading the Bible, I saw Case for Christ book on my desk, and I picked it up and I was like, you know what? We're going on vacation. I'm gonna bring this with me and start reading it on the
Mm.
plane. I'll read it while I'm there, and I finished the book while I was on vacation,
Wow.
and I actually gave it to somebody because there was a woman at Starbucks at the hotel we were staying at, and she saw it as I put it down. I was ordering coffee for Christy and I. We were going to be going to the pool that morning with the kids, and she said, "Is that a good book?" And I said, "Yeah, it's a fantastic book." I'm like, it's helped me a lot. And she was, and then one of the other baristas was like, "You should read that to the girl."
Huh.
And so I kind of felt like, oh, maybe she's going through something that I'm going through. And
Mm.
so I went to the pool, finished the book. I wrote a little note in it in the inside cover for her. And I was like, you need this book more than I do, I think. I'm done. I'm done with it. I hope you find what you're looking for. Love, Jeremy. And I gave it to her. I
That's
went
cool.
back to the Starbucks and gave it to her, and she was like, "Oh, no, no, I'll buy it." I'm like, "No, no, have it. Like I'll buy my own copy. You need this book more than I do." And she was like, tears in her eyes.
Mm.
And I was like,
Cool.
okay, that felt good, like
Yeah.
doing something for somebody else,
Yeah.
like being in service to somebody else.
Right.
And so that kind of then went, led me through the whole read the Bible over the course of a year. And then the following Mother's Day, at the right after I finished reading the Bible, I got baptized
Mm.
at our local church, which we had been going to, off and on for a few months, and that was kind of like the start of like my journey into Christianity.
Amazing.
Um, and then since then, it's just been constant like seeking of the truth in all forms and fashions that I can consume. And I read self-help books, I read motivational books, I read books on history, I read, I kind of steer away from fiction unless it's something like 1984 or Brave New
Right.
World or
Right.
something that kind of like
Right.
maybe tells us what's coming in the future. But I went through this whole thing, man, and now I'm like, I've read multiple versions of the Bible at this point.
Yep.
I've started to go through the King James, the ESV. I read the NASB version.
Mm.
And my wife and I are now doing a Bible study together. Like it's a 365-day Bible study, and as we're going through it, we've got a lot of questions because I started through the New Testament. I kind of read John 6 times, and then I went and I read the rest of the Gospels, and then the epistles, and the rest of the letters, and then Revelation, and then I went back and read the Old Testament through.
Mm.
And when I got to the Old Testament the first time through, I had a lot of questions. I was like, this doesn't seem like the same guy
Mm.
who, I read about in the New
Yeah.
Testament.
Yeah.
This seems very different to me. The vibe is different. It's very violent. There's a lot of anger, it seems like.
Mhm.
And so as I'm reading through it with Christy, like a lot of the same questions are popping up. And so we're having these dialogues around it. And it's like,
Mm.
so that's led me down many other rabbit holes on like, okay, where did the Bible come from?
Yep.
And and where do people, how do people, and I hesitate to use the term blind faith because I don't want to like, I don't want to offend anybody,
Mhm.
because everybody, I feel like, and I've said this to you before, I feel like people, they find the Bible or they come to God and then they land on Christianity. Most people that kind of go through the same like born again,
Yep.
path that I've been on, and they believe it to be so true because they experience it, and Jesus talks about, only those who are born again can, will find their way to
Exactly.
God,
Yep.
basically. I'm paraphrasing, but that's, I think that they latch onto that and they're like, I found God, I found something, and I'm there. I found it. The truth is here. It's all in this book, and I just need to study the heck out of it, and I'm good.
Mm.
And so for me though, there's just too many unanswered questions still, that just things don't make sense. And I'm like, well, there's some hypocrisy in there, both by God and Moses, and there's a lot of things that like happen that just, I don't know, they just don't like, it doesn't compute for me. I have a tough time reconciling a lot of the things, and
Yeah.
so I just continued to seek the truth. And I think a lot of people, they feel like, okay, this is the truth, and I'm done.
Mm,
and I don't need to continue seeking because I found what I'm looking for. And for me, while I found what I was looking for, I found like that loving connection to God and the source of all creation.
mm,
But I also, question a lot of things, and I don't think enough people do, and they just take it on the blind faith that everything that's in there is gospel.
yeah.
And maybe it is, but it to me it just doesn't feel like everything that's in there is gospel. I feel like there's a lot of stories that have been retold if you go down like through Egyptian history and Babylonian history and all
Mhm.
these other like Indian culture and all this other stuff. There's a lot of similarities in the stories that are told. And so it's like, okay, well, like what really happened between Genesis 1 and Genesis 3? Like we don't know, you know what I
Yep.
mean? It just
Yep.
seems like there's a big gap there,
Yep.
And so that's just kind of my story. And like I'm here I am, continuing to read anything that I can get my hands on, watching videos on YouTube at 2x speed so I can just get through
Yeah.
as many as I can in the spare time, the limited spare time that I have to
Right.
just try to land on more truth, because there's more truth is out there. It's just where do you go to get it? And
Yeah.
a lot of
Yeah.
people just don't bother looking for it, after they find God.
Right. Well, man, where do I even start? It just
I know it's a lot to unpack.
no, it's great, brother. And it's I think more and more people, your story is gonna inspire, encourage, or there's so many people on the cusp right now of you might be sharing your story, might be the beginning of someone else going down those rabbit holes of your 2020 journey. And many people are waking up to all the systems of control. And
Mhm.
that's really what I think is happening is we're experiencing a lack of joy, a lack of love. You did act of service for someone, you felt something that feels good. And like, well, what is that? Why would it feel good? And what is the origin of feeling good to give someone else something? And love, the Hebrew word for love is ahava, and ahava, ahava, means to give. So God so loved the world that he gave. Love is always in giving. So acts of service is the greatest act of love. But anyway, just unpacking all this, it's so fascinating that I was thinking this morning while I was showering. The same board that they teach us to play checkers on is the same board they play chess on. The
Mhm.
exact same layout, exact same moves,
Yeah.
exact same lines, but overlaid, there's a different game on a board that most
Mhm.
people are playing checkers on. And there's probably a game over chess that, you hear 12D chess or all this
Yeah.
stuff that there's that one picture of Trump with the three chess boards. Have you seen
Yep.
that picture? And it's like,
Yep.
well,
Oh yeah.
I'm sure there's intellects beyond even that three board game, but there's always more. And I think that's what's interesting is your journey is I came from the religious narrative so tightly and was so confused. And then when I attempted suicide at the age of 20, that's when I knew God was real because I was the pray around the flagpole kid. I'd lead that stuff and worship. I was never a youth group groupie. There was like youth group, the clique of youth
Yeah.
group kids.
Uh-huh.
I never fit in there because I was an athlete also. So I never, I was always doing sports, but I was in that world integrated really strongly. And then I was, with all the abuse that I had endured, and I'm going to tie this into your story. This is not about me, but just
Yeah, right on.
a different parallel journey. All the abuse that I endured, um, by 17 years old, I was so depressed I couldn't get out of bed on Saturdays, and 18 years old, all just started to question everything. 19 years old, anorexia, 20-year old attempt to take my own life. And through that journey, I started, I was going to this junior college, this community college. I went to play basketball the first year, and I'm taking this anthropology class, and I'm holding fossils in my hand that don't align to the 6 day, literal 6 days of Genesis, the 6,000
Yeah.
years that we're taught. And it really, really threw me off because um, there's a religious doctrine in anthropology, but there's also empirical truth in that you feel something, you hold something, people have dug up something from the ground. How old is it? Well, it's old enough that it doesn't fit into the 6,000 year narrative.
Hmm.
And that's when it started to like crack this very fragile fear-based control. Like the world that I know had to fit in this thing because God is real and I'm a sinner and all the things. And it was just like this wound so tightly
Yeah.
that something happened when my personal life and accusations of my family and all that was going on. It like a pin snapped and I couldn't contain anymore. And that's when I tried to take my life. And then I had to try to kill myself. Literally, God, like your car, your car accident stories.
Hmm.
God, there's no reason I'm not dead today, except that there is a God.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I've ever shared the story in this podcast, but in addition to, I had a roommate. I was transferring to this 4 year university. I already had a roommate, already had dorm picked out. Everything was going. And I was filling out for my associate's degree in the anthropology class that I was taking. I'll never forget this. Um, it was 5 o'clock on in November of 2001, and I'm filling out my degree, and you need 90 credits, I think, or whatever it was. But the anthropology class that I took didn't fit for whatever reason. There's 4 anthropology classes they offered. One didn't fit in the degree. And so I'm taking this. My faith had already been, I was, on the verge of like losing everything. And this one class didn't fit. And I was afraid my dad was going to beat me. I'm 20, I'm almost 20, I'm 20 years old, a couple months past 20 years old. I'm afraid of my dad. This is
Yeah.
a crazy story. And this is just part of the life. So it's 5 o'clock and I look, my professor, her office hours were from 9:30 to 10:30 in the morning. So it's 5 o'clock. I'm like, crap, but I drive to the community college. I'm on my way and I miss a turn and it's out of my mind and I just lost it. So I took my seatbelt off and I floored it to fly off a bridge into the Snohomish River. And while I was going, I hear, "Ah," and all of a sudden the semi truck like comes right next to me and I hit the side and keep going. And I was so pissed at God. In this moment, I was like, fuck you, God, you won't even let me die. I was so angry. And I remember telling him, I don't want to be someone with a testimony. Like,
Hmm.
oh, here's a guy in a wheelchair, and like, oh, let me tell you that God's real and he loves you. I didn't want to be that. I was so
Yeah.
angry and all the pain. And so I get past the bridge, and there was a retaining wall from another merging lane, and I tried to drive right into it. And a semi truck, a different semi truck, comes on, and I'm like, "What are the odds?" I've driven that drive how many times? This never happened. So I get to the university campus or college campus, pitch black at night. I'm in Seattle, like Boston, it gets dark early in November,
Yeah.
so it's already pitch black. I'd never been at night, kids doing night classes. I go to the academic building or the faculty building. All the doors are locked. Can't No one's there, and I'm freaking out. And I find one door and it opens, and it's pitch black. The only lights in the building were from the vending machines and
Hmm.
the exit sign that were illuminating. And I go up the stairs and I turn a corner, and down the hallway, light is coming out of a door. And I'm looking at where this is, and I walk down the hall, and I look, and this lady's sitting in there, and I see her, I start crying, and I scared the crap out of her.
Really?
I scared her, and I explained to her like I need to graduate this class I'm taking, and she's like, I've been teaching here for 20 years. This is the first time I've ever stayed this late. And I was
No
like,
way.
what is going on? And she goes, I'll let you switch into this other class, but you have to take both that class and the class you're in and finish both in 5 weeks. So I said, I'll do it. And it was that night that I realized that God is real. That
Yeah.
what was this lady, how the semi truck cut me off one, the semi truck cut me off two. I get this campus, every door's locked. She says she's never been there in 20 years that late. And then the one class that I could have transferred in, she lets me. I mean, it was just this experiential confirmation that there's something way greater than I am. My intellect failed me.
Yeah.
And ironically, share the story that I went to a counselor at the college to sign up for this fall credits because I was ready to graduate, get my AA. And he signed me up for this anthropology class. It was the same day that Seattle had, I think it was forget 5.2 earthquake. It was one of the largest earthquakes in Seattle history. And I'm
Uh-huh.
sitting in there, things are falling off his desk. And I look outside the window and I can see the ground like rolling, and kids are on an elementary school playground on the other side of the parking lot of this college, and they're playing like it was nothing. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget this day. I'm like, talk about foreshadowing
Yeah.
the day I take this class. Anyway, I share all this to say, brother. Now I gave you a long story. I share all that to say that's when I went on this journey to like, what is truth? Like, what is real? And
Hmm.
consuming, the some of the Vedas and Buddhism and Judaism and Christianity, and I wanted to understand, why are there all these different denominations? Who are the origins of the denominations? What is a denomination? Why did it start? And I started consuming everything I could get access to. But I then went back into Christianity, and then I tried to like be a reformer within Christianity. And it's interesting that in 2020, um, in January of 2020, I did this podcast, Why I Left Christianity to Find the Love of God. I think I might have shared it with you one time.
Yep.
And that's when I finally felt free.
Hmm.
Like, okay, now I can talk about whatever I want
Yeah.
and not have the chains of obligation of what's right or wrong or sinning or all this. And it's led me to this point today where, there's a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And that book was really transformational in my journey of healing my own personal trauma. But it also showed me that we know what's true. I always say, how do you know if something's true or not? Is if you can breathe more deeply,
Mm.
because the truth will make you free. And so freedom is a byproduct of truth. Well, truth is a byproduct of us actually loving ourselves enough to sit with our own body and be like, man, can I breathe more deeply? Then it's true. And if I can't, then it's not true. And no person can teach me that. No pastor, priest, guru, system, not Ra's legion of, religion of, doctrines can teach me that. And
It's
that's where I'm at today. And that's why I love talking with you about all this stuff.
it's so wild, like what you're saying. I mean, it all hits home for me because I feel the same way. What what kind of like just resonates with me is the whole concept of the, you mentioned like all these different denominations,
Mm,
and that's like tying back to like when I was younger, I kind of saw that like that was one of the main reasons that I always cited for my atheism was that
mm,
how can all of these religions be true?
right,
How can
right.
they all how can they all be right? Like which one is true? There's too many of them, and they're and as I've now gotten older and I've kind of sought wisdom and sought you know more truth,
Mm,
I start to realize it's there are a lot of them are interwoven into
yep,
one another,
yep.
and they have a lot of the same. Now we're getting thunder. uh I have a lot of the same kind of like feelings that I had when I was younger.
Mm,
But the difference now for me is that I have a connection to God, the source. Like
yes,
I
yes,
have I have a connection, I pray, I seek, the wisdom, the knowledge, the understanding that he can give me.
right.
Um, and I kind of use that like intuitiveness that like, okay, I'm feeling a certain way. I gotta kind of
Mm,
go, I gotta do it. I gotta go, like when you and I first started having these types of conversations, like I went and bought like, I don't know, I've got like one, two, three, four, five, a dozen books just sitting on my desk that I didn't have before.
yeah, yeah,
That I'm like, I gotta go, I gotta read this, I gotta read this. I watched this podcast, I watched this
yeah.
video, I kind of like consume this information, and like they talk about a book, and I'm like, there's a reason why I was drawn to watch this, and it wasn't a YouTube algorithm because I went and I searched for something.
Yeah,
It wasn't like
yeah,
YouTube just served something up to me like it does
yeah.
because I don't pay attention to any of that crap. I
Right.
just, I just, you know, like certain things I'm just drawn to and I go look for it. I seek it out. And that's the whole point I think about being like a truth seeker
Mhm.
is, a lot of people will call themselves truth seekers, but they're only like laser focused on like one truth,
Yes.
you know?
Yes.
And there are many truths,
Yes.
it's not just, there's not just one truth.
Right.
People will say, oh, there's only one truth. And it's like, yeah, there's one truth in that category,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
there are so many categories that have truth in it.
Yes. Yes.
And so, and I think religion in general is very much like that. There are so many different categories of religion. Like religion is in itself a category, but then you have all these subcategories and
Yep.
denominations, and
Yep.
they all have their truth.
Yep.
But there's a connection between a lot of those truths. The story of Jesus has been told many different ways through many different, religions.
Right.
And I believe that his words, his teachings, all of those things are real, and they mean something. Like when I listen
Yes.
to them and I read them, I'm like, okay, this resonates with me. Like I
Yes.
can
Yes.
reconcile this within my heart
Yes.
that this is real. This is truth. This is the way to
Right.
live.
Right.
Um, whether he said them or not, right? Like, or whether someone else said them and then they rewrote it into the Bible as if Jesus said them.
Yeah.
Like those are things that like we'll never know, right?
Right.
And people have to take it on, kind of going back to like the whole blind faith comment I made earlier.
Yeah.
You take it on faith that it was him, right? That he is your salvation. And he
And
may
real
he may be,
and real quick, just an interesting note about what the Bible says, even about faith. It says two things that are significant about faith. The Bible says, without faith, it is impossible to please him.
Hmm.
So it's impossible to please God without faith. But it also says, faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. It's
Hmm.
like, okay,
Yeah,
so that sounds really nice. But if
yeah,
you're saying that Genesis to Revelation is the only word of God, and only your faith can come from that, that already is a limiting box
right.
versus, so
Yeah.
it's interesting.
That goes back to what I mean about like that when I said like some things are hypocritical,
Right,
right? Like
right.
they're hard to reconcile, like the God of the Old Testament, Yahweh, was, you know, he was a he was mean. I mean, he was mean. Um, he hand selected the Israelites, but like aren't all peoples God's people? And if all people are God's people, like why is he having the Israelites go wipe everybody else out if he's got the power to here's the one thing that always jumps out when I'm like kind of doing my Bible study with Christy. It goes back to like the Pharaoh
Hmm.
and when the Israelites are leaving Egypt
Yeah,
and he hardens Pharaoh's heart.
right.
And I'm like, well, that's Moses telling the story. Is that just his perspective? How
Hmm.
does he know that God actually hardened the heart of Pharaoh, or was Pharaoh just stubborn and like using free will to make his own call?
Hmm.
And if you can't have both, right? There can't be free will
Yeah, that's right.
and God then hardens the Pharaoh's heart. Like maybe he had it all kind of pre-planned and predestined for these things to happen, but how can you have predestination if you have free will? So there's just a lot of hypocrisy in the whole concept of like being able to do what you want to do and having free will. And then people will say, "Oh, well, everything's predestined, like your life is predestined and all these different things." And I'm like, "Well, that could potentially be true. But if that's the case, then why did Eve eat the forbidden fruit?
Hmm.
Because she had free will to do so.
Hmm.
She could have made the choice and God could have prevented her from doing it."
Hmm.
Right? If it was predestined, then why would he have predestined humanity to fall?
Hmm.
So, I just kind of go through these like these like kind of talk tracks in my head and I start thinking through it and I'm like, it doesn't compute for me,
Right.
you know?
Right. Well, it's interesting. There's a couple of things I want to say about Genesis because Genesis one after the night I didn't die, I started getting downloads and this one guy said to me because I had always had a New King James Bible and an NIV Bible growing up, and I didn't even Bible versions weren't even a thing to me. I was unconscious or unaware. Like the only thing that I didn't understand is growing up going to church, everyone used to bring their Bible. And I do remember, and I do miss the sound of turn to, and you could hear the crack of the pages.
Yeah.
And like a whole church like cracking pages. And that's a sound that's still like very sweet to my memory of sound. But in that, they would put the verse on the screen and everyone would read. And I was like, his words didn't match my words. And I didn't understand. So it was hard to follow along, which over time, then you started just to look at the screen. And over time, started to look at the screen and not bring your Bible. And then over
Mhm.
time, so I started to see the change within the church culture. And then after a suicide attempt at 20, I'll never forget this guy that ended up working in his ministry for a while. He said, if you want the power of God in your life, uh, read the King James Bible. And I was like, don't tell me. Like I was pretty fiery at this time, and I had read the New King James Bible cover to cover, and I started just consuming. But I also was recognizing what the flesh is within me of like that flinch, that gut flinch of like, like someone say, do something. I'm like, that, like, I don't want to do that. And I felt
Yeah.
that like clench. And I was like, that's interesting. Why would I feel that clinch when someone said, if you want the power of God, read the King James Bible? And I was like, what is that in me? So I started to read the King James Bible and I started seeing all these differences, and not from just not just the words, but the
Hmm.
energy, like the vibration. Now I would say vibration, but I felt like
Yeah.
the spirit of the New King James Bible is very harsh.
Hmm.
There's a harshness to it and there's a legalism to it. And anyway, I started to feel these differences. And anyway, Genesis, I started getting these downloads of Genesis. And one day God told me that there's a time gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. Now I never heard this. No one ever told me this. I never read this anywhere. And I'm
Yeah.
like, there's a time gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So I crack it open and God says, ask me, what is the word and? And he says, it's a conjunction of time. So we wake up and we brush our teeth and we go to the bathroom and is a conjunction of time. So
Right.
then he shows me in just the first four verses alone in Genesis 1:1 through 1:4 says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So there's one and.
Yeah.
Genesis 1:2. And the earth was without form and void, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Genesis 1:3. And
Yeah.
God said, let there be light. And there was light. And God saw the light that it was good. And he divided the light from the darkness. You have 8 ands just within the first four verses of the Bible.
Hmm.
And he showed me in between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, because I remember being in Bible. I went to a Christian high school for 1 year, my sophomore year, to go play basketball and sports. And I remember sitting in chapel class and kids are asking, like, was the earth flooded? I don't understand. Like, did God make the earth flooded? Why is in Genesis 1:2 and the earth was without form and void and darkness upon the face of the deep and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters? And no one can answer that. It's a logical question a young mind would ask, like, hey, what's going on here? No one can answer. And so in that day that God gave me the download, he showed me that he flooded the earth in between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Hmm.
And there was a huge time gap. And I don't know if it's millions of years, billions of years, who knows, but it's a significant amount of time.
Hmm.
And then he brings me to later says, thinking in Genesis chapter 9, says, and he remembered Noah.
Hmm.
And I'm like, he remembered Noah. Like,
Yeah.
what the heck? There's only 8 people on the earth
Right.
supposedly
Right.
surviving. You remembered him.
Yeah.
You weren't thinking of him. And so it reminded me of, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, the same type of language that was used. And so takes me down this whole journey of Genesis. Well, later I'm reading Charles Spurgeon's work, and Spurgeon talks about the time gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. And I was blown away. I'll never forget when I was reading Spurgeon's work. He's talking about the time gap, and I was starting to talk about this with other people, and I'm like, is this heresy? I don't even know. But when Spurgeon writes about it, I was like, okay, at least there's someone else writing about this.
Yeah.
And then it takes me to Genesis chapter. So the first Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And new Bible versions from 1881 onward said the heavens and the earth, which I could get into that, but we don't have to on this podcast. But the heaven and the earth. Genesis 2:1, thus the heavens and all the hosts of them were finished. Genesis 3:1, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. I'm like, what interesting storyline. Even if you took the first verse, because there's ways you can read the Bible. I don't know if
Mhm.
anyone's ever heard this, but you don't have to read it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You don't have to read it chronologically. You can read it 1, 1, 1. You can read it. You can read patterns every
Yeah.
17th verse, every 23rd verse. I mean, it's really wild, like what this, like it's the matrix behind, the screen
Yeah.
behind you. It
Yeah.
literally is this quantum playbook. And so now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And the serpent said to the woman, yea, as God said, you shall not eat of the tree which you shall not eat of the tree whereof God or what did he say? Yea, as God said, you shall not eat of the tree. And the woman said, we shall not eat it, neither shall we touch it, lest we die. And the serpent said, thou shalt not surely die, for in the day that you eat thereof, your eyes shall be open, you shall be as gods. What's interesting about what we're talking about right now, and I've not landed one way or the other, but what's fascinating is God never said don't touch it. He
Yeah.
said in Genesis 2, I think 16, he said, don't eat of it. She
Right.
said, God said, we shall not eat of it, nor shall we touch it, lest we die. And that's where I think this interesting dynamic, you were talking about Eve having free will. It's like, dude, her free will was before she people say, what was the first sin? She
Hmm.
added into the word before
Yeah.
even the option of taking that fruit.
Yeah.
So I think what's fascinating is knowing that there is so much addition to the word of God. It could be within the Bible itself, like what we're
Mhm.
talking about. And I think the real seekers of truth are trying to parse through all this to get to the core. What is big T truth, but where are all the truths that I think our job is to collect and talk and share amongst each other?
Mhm. Yeah, I 100% agree. I mean, and all the things you say are about Genesis. I've thought about these things, and I'm like, when you read things, literally, and like you actually like read the words, and you don't just read them to read them, and you actually pay attention to the words that are used,
Yeah.
it opens up a different perspective of the words that are in the Bible and the stories that are in the Bible.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, you know, that's an interesting concept because, okay, like when the angel of the Lord comes down, right? Is the angel of the Lord, is that God?
Right.
And like some people are like, oh, well, it was Jesus, or it was Saint Michael
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
whoever. And like it's just like, okay, so but who was it? How do
Right.
we know who it
How do
was?
you?
And there's
Right.
so many different stories about who it was and how you should read it. And then when you get into things like, and this is probably too long of a conversation for this podcast, but like you start to look at the Elohim,
Yeah.
and Elohim is actually plural.
Plural.
It's
Yep.
not just a singular.
Yep.
And so the Elohim, and then and then you go down the rabbit hole of like, well, the Elohim, were they like ancient aliens that like got like, are they like angels, demons? Like what were they? Who were
Right.
they?
Right.
Why were they here?
Right.
And then I read this great book called The Unseen Realm,
Yeah.
which I think I told you about, and
Yep.
it in that book he unpacks a ton of he from like a traditional Hebrew language perspective,
Yep.
and then Aramaic and all those different languages that made up the Bible, and Greek and everything. The original Bible was really written in Greek.
Mhm.
If you go back to like the early days of like when the Bible was like found again in like Babylon and like
Yeah.
all that, it's all written initially in Greek.
Here it is. Here's the Septuagint Bible, which is
Yeah,
the first Greek version of,
yeah,
yeah, the first from Genesis to Revelation, the Bible. I have it in
yeah.
English, but it's the Greek translation of it. Yeah.
Right. And it's just anyway, that all that's to say is that like the Elohim were like the divine council. Were they the divine council of God? Were they like okay, so really what happened with the fallen angels? A lot of this, like no one really knows the story. They just kind of put it all together. And
Right.
one of the things I've been reading lately is the Apocrypha,
Yep.
because the book of Jasher and the book of Jubilees and the Maccabees and all that stuff. And I'm kind of working my way through all of that because I'm like, there's just so much more to it. And like, why was this stuff kept out of the Bible? Like the book
Mm.
of Jasher is the book of the it means the book of the book of the record, or the book of the true record, or something like that.
Mm.
And really it tells Genesis, the story of Genesis, in a whole different way.
Yeah.
And when I read through that, I'm like, there's just so much more to the story of like Abraham and um uh who's the oh man, it's escaping me, the Nimrod, and
Oh,
all
yeah.
like
Yep.
all that whole story. There's just so much more to it. And it's like, well, why wasn't this part of what they put in the Bible? Why did they keep these things out of the Bible? And
Right.
you know, and the party line is that, well, it can't be verified.
Right.
And it's like, well, how is any of it verified? I mean,
Right.
this is thousands of years ago. How can you
Right.
verify any of it? Who's to decide what's verifiable and what's not
Right.
verifiable? And
Right.
then you start to go down that whole rabbit hole of like, oh, well, the Vatican.
Yep.
The Vatican decided. And you're like, oh, okay. And then what's the Vatican? The Vatican is a religion. It is a
Yes.
business. It has
Yes.
created a form of Christianity because it saw Christianity swell.
Yep.
And Christianity wasn't Christianity as we know it today. Christianity they were Christ followers,
Hmm.
but they were basically following their hearts. And
Yes.
like they were seeking love of one another, and to be in service to one another, and to
Yeah.
help one another, and to heal one another, and all of those things.
Yeah. Living out the
Whereas
Beatitudes, truly living out the Beatitudes.
exactly,
Yes.
exactly. And all of that is like, okay, well, then the Catholic Church decided to create a religion around Christianity and then develop the book so that we would be like MK Ultra, basically, to like be like believe this is the only word, when
Yes.
there's so much else out there
Right.
that really makes up history.
Right.
And they're like, oh, well, you can't prove that it's real. And it's like, well, okay.
Mm.
How can you prove that Genesis 1 through
Right.
3 is real?
Yeah, exactly.
You're just taking it on faith. But it's like, okay, well, why can't we take Jasher on faith? Or why can't we take the Maccabees on faith? Like somebody
Yeah.
wrote those,
Right.
you
Right.
know? Who's to
It,
say?
it is so fascinating. Like I just turned to Isaiah 14:12 in the Septuagint. So what's interesting, besides the New King James Bible, there's not a Bible. I don't even think the ESV, I'd have to grab it, but I don't even think the ESV in Isaiah 14:12 uses the word Lucifer. So the only time Lucifer is ever mentioned in the Bible is one time, and that's Isaiah 14:12. Here in the Septuagint says, how is Lucifer fallen from heaven, who is the harbinger of the morning? He who sent messages to all the nations is trampled down into the earth. Thou indeed didst say in thy heart, I will send up into heaven. Above the stars of heaven, I will place my throne. I will seat myself on a lofty mountain, on the lofty mountains which face the north. I will ascend above the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So those are the only time that Lucifer is mentioned in the Bible. Now, all Bible versions, NASB, NIV, I'm pretty sure ESV, which is the most popular of the conservative movement
Mhm.
right now within evangelical Christianity. Um, I mean, I could go on the message, any like left, right, like spectrum. Say in Isaiah 14:12, how art thou fallen from heaven, O morning star?
Mm.
Well, in Revelation, Jesus says, I am the bright and morning star, the offshoot of David. So Jesus himself calls himself the morning star, which is
Hmm.
where you get the pentagram is an
Yeah.
upside down star within the circle. It's mocking Jesus falling. If he's the morning star rising,
Right.
a pentagram where they sacrifice and do all their stuff, do it on an upside down star. So it's interesting, even in the Bible version. So my point is not to say one Bible version is right or wrong, but I'm trying to show there's a game being played even within the text
Oh yeah.
that, and people are like, well, this is it. Well, let me show you something else. How about Acts 8:36 or Acts 8:37 is missing from the Bible completely.
Hmm.
And when they used to read, it used to go number, number, number. You could read down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So Genesis 1, Genesis 1, 2, Genesis. Then they put it in paragraph form. So you couldn't
Hmm.
see when they took verses out, whole sections out of the Bible.
Yeah.
Stuff like that is so fascinating.
Hmm.
Um, I know they don't do it with any other religious text. Not that I've found. I have an old Quran and I have what I would call the NIV Quran of today's like PR version of the Quran.
Yeah.
It's the words are a little more modern day vernacular, but they don't take any verses out.
Hmm.
The Bhagavad Gita, all the Veda texts, I haven't seen new versions of that. So there is something unique about this quantum playbook, the Bible, that for some reason they're getting within it and messing it up and keeping things from out of it. Um, and like, here's something interesting. It doesn't say any time when Satan and one third of the angels were kicked out of heaven. It only talks about why they were kicked out and how they were kicked out. Jesus said, "Behold, I beheld Satan fall from heaven like lightning." So I believe they were kicked out between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Hmm.
And where did Satan go? He directly went to earth because earth is the only thing that God created. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Earth is an out of balanced heart, EARTH, and heaven is a conjunction of heart and even, a balanced heart. So you have God's heart, heaven, and the wild heart, and Satan came down to it. And that's why the serpent was more subtle. Like the serpent was already there. And that's who I think God was talking to. Because I'm like, who is he talking to? Why say any of this? Why not just do it?
Yeah.
Why say,
Yeah.
let there be light? And there, who is he talking? What do you mean, allow there to be light? Aren't you the most high God? Allow there
Hmm.
to be light. And there was light. And God
Yeah.
saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. So if you had to see something that was good, what's the opposite of good? Bad, evil. I don't know what the hell is actually going on
Yeah.
in these first few verses.
I know.
Uh, all this stuff, and this is what's fun reading outside text, like what you and I are on right now, reading all the Gnostic Gospels. Like I read the Gnostic Gospels.
Yeah, I've got that book here too, The Gospel of the Gnostics by Greenless.
It's like the book of Saul. Saul. Let's see. What's the disciple? What do we call him? The disciple that betrayed Jesus? Uh,
Judas.
oh yeah, Judas. Sorry, Judas. The Gospel of Judas is that he loved God so much, he loved Jesus so much that he had to be the one to actually do it.
Hmm.
And he knew that the sacrifice, because Jesus had the prophecy had to be fulfilled. I'm like, dude, that's an interesting perspective. Judas
Yeah.
Iscariot actually loving the Messiah so much that he knew he would have to be forever. I mean, stuff like that's a different perspective. And you're like,
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah. Even in the Bible that we all read, the kind of traditional Bible, any version of it there is that verse where Jesus looks at Judas and says, "Whatever you're going to do, do it."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like he
He
tells him
knew,
to
they
do
knew.
it because he knew that what was going to happen, and that computes with me.
Yes.
You know,
Same. Where is,
I can reconcile it. Um, um, but yeah, there's even in the New Testament, there's so many things that I have a tough time reconciling. The Old Testament, forget about it. There's so many things in the Old
right.
Testament that are just hard to reconcile because there's a lot of, I think, hypocrisy in God's actions and the things that He does. And then like I go through the same like you know turmoil when I like say these things out loud. I'm like, is this
Mm.
blasphemy? Like, am I saying something bad about God? Like, I love God,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and God knows that I love Him, and
Yes.
I tell Him every
Yes.
day, and I pray to Him, and I have a connection with Him. But that doesn't mean I can't question some of the things that we've been told about God. And
Hmm.
I truly believe that He will deliver me to the truth as I continue on my truth seeking journey throughout the
Yes.
rest of my life, my
Yes.
existence here. It's like I have the right and the free will to seek the truth
Yes.
and to ask questions and be inquisitive and try to understand what has been presented to us
Right.
by our overlords here on earth,
Yeah. Yes.
and
Truly.
that's really what it is. And
Yes.
like I'll also say in the New Testament, there are things that I have a tough time reconciling. Like, why doesn't Paul, in any of his letters, mention any of the sayings of Jesus?
Yeah.
Like, why doesn't he mention any of the contact with the disciples?
Yep.
Like, why doesn't he talk about any of those things? He doesn't cite a single story of Jesus. Not one. Like he never cites any of the things that like the
Any of the
acts and the things that
miracles.
occur, none of the miracles,
Right.
nothing is discussed in any of those letters. He doesn't refer to them. So like who was Paul,
Right.
right? Was Paul who we are told he was? What, there's just, and a lot of people don't think, they take it on faith that this is, oh yeah, like he's, you know, and I hear people like, I watch online kind of like Bible studies all the time, and they're like, yeah, like God, he's a jealous God, he's an angry God. And I'm like,
Mhm.
is he though? Like, was he?
Yeah.
Because would he have done all these? Like, would God really do all these like mean and evil spirited things? Like, asking Abraham to kill his only son that
Yeah.
he waited decades to have on the faith of God. And like, and people will say, oh, well, it's because he was testing his faith. And I'm like, but that's punitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like kind of an evil action to
100%.
take to
100%.
say, go
Right.
kill your firstborn, the only son that you have, the
Yes.
only flesh and blood that you have created, which I helped you create. Go kill him. Go
Right.
sacrifice him to me. And it's like, well, he has faith that God is gonna what? Have him help him have another son, maybe, or what, whatever he might have
Right.
been thinking. But it's all speculative, obviously. But it's like, I find it really, really hard in my heart to believe that God would have done that, you
Mm.
know? Um, so yeah,
Or how about this at church this morning? Uh, he's talking about David and Bathsheba and that story, and there
yeah,
was some good teaching there. David lost his purpose, and he was supposed to be out. It was the time where he was supposed to. All the kings were out at battle in the spring, and David wasn't there, and he had sent
hmm
Joab in his place and all that. But he was the pastor brought up Deuteronomy 14, I think 12 maybe, or Deuteronomy 14, I forget. And it said, God said, it's, you should not have more than one wife. Okay.
hmm
So that's in Deuteronomy. But later in Second Samuel 12, when he's talking about the story, God says, didn't I give you all of Saul's wives? And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
bro, you can't have it both ways. Like
yeah,
you can't say and I understand there's the literal, so I do know that the secret keepers look at the literal teachings for the sheep and the masses, and that the esoteric teachings and the meaning behind all this is for those that are initiated or worthy.
yeah,
But that's also bullshit. I look at those people like, fuck you, who do you
yeah.
think you are? So, yeah,
What makes
exactly.
you so
Because you
great
were
that
born
you're,
into some family with some
yeah,
secrets. Like I was born in a family too, and I'll tell you it's all bullshit. Like,
hmm
um, so I hear all that, and sometimes I'm like, but I just Jesus said, "Come to me as a little child." And a little child takes things plain and for face value and what it is. Why? Because it's pure. It's the purest form. That there is no deceit in a child. There isn't a belief in that it is cruel, that authority is wrong. And that either is a naive sociopathic doctrine that's been inserted into humanity, or I do think that is I have to check, how does that resonate in my body? In my body, that's what I want. That's the world I want. I want my children to live in that world. I want to live in that world. So to me, that seems like truth. But I think when we take, like you've referenced this term, I think 3 or 4 times now, blind faith.
hmm
What an oxymoron in a way, because faith is supposed to help you see.
yeah,
And there is this blind faith where people just close their eyes and try to like braille it out. And that when your eyes are closed, you can't travel far. But when your eyes are open, you can go as far as you want.
hmm
Um, so it's an interesting time, and I love these conversations. And I know everyone listening to this, they'll be like, who knows? But it gives people permission. I think that's ultimately, in the key, why I'm going to bring up why I like the King James Bible again, but the ETH on a verb is the purest form of a verb, because a verb never ends. A verb does not have any beginning nor ending. So we hear the word run, And we compute through our brain run. You have to start to run and you can't run indefinitely. So you have to stop eventually. Run. Okay. I can't run. I don't want to run. I don't like running, whatever. I'm not running now. Run. I have to begin to run. But runneth is indefinite. Runneth, when did runneth begin? Runneth has always been. So Jesus in the King James Bible is very distinct and says, seek and ye shall find, knock and the door will be open, ask and it shall be given to you. For everyone that seeketh, findeth,
Hmm.
asketh, receiveth,
Hmm.
knocketh, the door shall be open. And I really like that. It's our job because that puts the responsibility back on us, not on God. You're in what you said earlier is like, now I'm going to seek truth, and God has to be big enough to either show me what is and isn't true, or essentially we can come to the conclusion maybe then it's all bullshit. And we know it's not bullshit. There is God.
Right.
And the thing that I'll let you finish this off. I just want to share that I came to the conclusion, I don't know, 2017. I had read the Bible for the seventh time, cover to cover. I was angry. My life hadn't changed. I was still struggling with the same things I was struggling with. There was no like magic. I had never missed a day of praying morning or night on my knees in 14 years, from the night I attempted suicide all the way until, I mean, I went hard in the paint, and I was not different. And I didn't understand why, because I thought reading the Bible is like purifies me or cleanses me, or Psalm 118, thy word have I hid in my heart that might not sin against thee. Like I would ask God to burn his word into my heart. I would place the Bible over my chest and ask him to sear his word into my heart. Like I was like so intense about this thing, but I was still struggling with the same stuff. And I finally came to this place because I was so caught up in being a people pleaser that I realized that I was also people pleasing God. And I was afraid to really tell God how angry I was at him for all the pain and suffering and trauma and abuse and terror that I had lived in my whole life. And I had to pretend like, oh my God, Jesus loves you. Okay, thanks, Jesus. Like, really, I want to say, you mother,
Yeah.
let him have it. And in 2017, I came to this conclusion that, I love God with every fiber of my freaking being. I do. But I'm going to seek truth wherever that leads me, even if God sends me to hell at the end of my life.
Hmm.
I'm still going to love him. I'm not trying to make a deal with him. There's no deal I'm trying to make with God. I do love God, and God, that's up to you now what you're going to do with me. I've given you everything, my heart, my hopes, my dreams, my past, my present, my future, my thoughts. And here am I, literally, as even in this podcast right now, with a brother who I love, and we're on this journey together, and everyone can listen and not listen, turn it off. Of like, man, there is so much more. And the burden I used to feel like was on me to prove I was real and I was true to God. And now I'm like, God, no, I'm sorry. If you're infinite and you're almighty and you're the most high and you are real and you are present and you are all the things that I'm told you are, then the burden is not on me, a finite corporal body in this limited time space reality that I will occupy here. The burden really is on you. You have to show me, like Moses saying, show me your glory.
Hmm.
And that's where I'm at right now. Of like, God, you have to show me your glory.
Yeah. And I think he does. I think he does, and he
Yeah.
picks and chooses when he does. And
Mm,
you go through hell to get to heaven,
that's
and
true.
like you said, you're in a corporeal body here on earth. We're in, as our good friend Eric says, you're in a meat suit, right?
Yeah, that's
Your
right.
soul, you're an infinite soul in a meat suit here on earth for a period of time.
Yeah.
And and I think, God picks and chooses when he shows us his glory, and he gives us little glimpses of who he is at times when we need him.
Mm,
There have been times where I've prayed, and I go through the Lord's Prayer, but not, I don't recite it verbatim. I kind of make it my own, which is
mm,
really how you're supposed to pray. And
yeah. Yeah.
um, and you weave your own desires and needs into that. And sometimes you pray for, you know, um, service and health and healing and, others and all that. And sometimes you pray for things that you need, even though he knows what you need and will give it to you when he
Mm,
knows that you need it. And sometimes my prayers are answered and sometimes they're not. And, I also recognize that there's billions of people on earth, and also praying to him. So, yes, he's infinite and he's connected to everybody, and except for the people who have pulled away and not, have chosen not to connect to him, and
Yeah.
that's fine. But he still does have that connection to you because he is the infinite source of all things. And
Yeah.
whether you believe in him or not, or whether you want to be connected to him or not, you are, just by being. Your
Mm,
soul is infinitely
that's
connected to
right.
God,
That's right.
no matter what you do on this
Right.
plane of existence, in this dimension, or in this reality at this time. You're still connected to him.
Mm,
And so, but I do believe he answers prayers. I do believe he shows us his glory. I've seen it in my own life. Both when I was not a believer, and
mm,
going back in retrospect and looking at things that have happened to me over my life, and I'm like, God was there. God was there for me. Even though I wasn't asking him to be, he was there for me because I have a greater purpose, and he put me here for a reason. And maybe that reason is to just continue to like have these conversations and seek truth, and talk about things, and explore, other versions of our reality that we're
yeah.
not being shown on a day-to-day basis, because like everything's categorized, everything's in a silo, and it's about breaking down the silos in order to see the bigger picture.
Right.
And then the bigger picture is what leads you to God's glory. And he'll give it to you if you continue to have the faith, right? And then it goes back to, okay, like, is it blind faith though?
Yeah.
I don't want to have blind faith. I want to have faith in God, that God's going to be there for me, and he's going to help me and do the things that I need him to do when I need them, but also understanding that he's not always going to be there, right? I
Mm,
mean, he's
yeah.
got a lot on his plate. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
You
and
remember
so
Noah, Yeah.
yeah, he's got a lot on his plate. And I just think, at the end of the day, it's for me, it's I've made the connection.
Mm,
And yeah, sometimes it's like wireless internet, right? Sometimes your connection's spotty and sometimes it's super strong.
mm.
And
No, that's good.
and
It's a good analogy.
and I have I have a genuine connection that I continue to try to nurture and grow every single day through love and gratitude, and
Mhm.
being thankful for what I have as a human in this meat suit, and as a soul on this
Yeah.
planet,
Yeah.
doing what I'm doing. And, I just hope that I'm doing enough, in the eyes of God, so that when my time comes, I'll be with God one day,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I will enjoy that part of my life. And if he, like you said, if he doesn't believe that I've done enough, then, I'm hopeful that along the way he'll show me certain things that I should be doing to make it enough, and that I'm not just continuing to go down rabbit holes into deep, dark, like,
Right.
recesses of the
Right.
world, and getting stuck there, and not like keeping that connection to the infinite source of all things, which is
Right.
God. So
And I can hear the Christian saying right now, maybe it's just in my own mind or someone watching this, to say, well, you're not saved by works. You're by grace are you saved through faith, not of works, lest any man should boast. And I say, yes, that goes for every person. God loves. Grace is something given that we don't deserve. So God is giving all of humanity grace to receive. And I guess, like you're saying, to receive that and do something with that is the greatest, I guess, gift we can do,
yeah, I mean, we're all God's children, right? And just
Yeah.
like with our own children, like, I don't tell my children what to do all the time, every day of their lives.
Right.
They have the free will to make decisions, right? I give them coaching, I give them guidance. I'm there for them when they need me. I make sure that they have, food and shelter and clothing, and are getting an education, and, are learning and are staying healthy, and, all of that. And that's what God does for us. That doesn't mean I'm not going to, stop my kids from researching things, or learning
Right.
things, or seeking understanding or wisdom in other areas of their lives that aren't connected to, maybe, to God. Because I think there's there's meaning in being well-rounded as an individual. And
Mhm.
well-rounded doesn't just mean you're good in every area. It means you also understand what's bad.
Yeah.
And you need to explore. You need to learn. You need to seek truth in
Mm,
all areas of your life. And you need to use discernment as to what you feel is true and what's not in your heart. And that's where God comes in, right? He's
yeah.
going to and because my heart is my expression of God,
Mm,
my own person.
yeah.
And my heart will tell me, does this resonate with me? Or does this sound like BS to me?
Right.
And if it resonates with me, there's probably a reason it resonates with me because my heart is open to God and my heart is open to everything else. And I let it come in and then I let my heart decide, okay, this doesn't make a lot of sense to me, or yes, this
Mm,
does make a lot of sense to me. And then you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together and you start to see the image of things. And God has a hand in that, whether you like it or not. But if you're just working on that one image in the bottom corner of that puzzle,
right.
that's all God's going to let you see.
Yeah.
And,
It's great.
maybe you're stuck there, and that's why like that kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of the podcast, which is if you if you land on God exists and you land on that as being your final truth,
Mm,
like you're probably not going to ever see the big picture.
mm,
You're probably never going to fully get the puzzle built, and none of us will, right?
right.
But I can seek to get as much of that puzzle built before my time expires here as
Yeah.
I can.
Yeah.
And I think God wants us to do that.
Yeah.
Why
I agree.
wouldn't why
I
wouldn't he?
agree.
You know?
And to pass it to the next generation so they can continue to build it. And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Man, brother, I love you. This is
I love you
fun.
too, man.
I'm
This is
really
great.
thankful for you and everyone listening. My just encouragement to you is don't be afraid to seek outside of what you're told is the only truth, whether it's atheism or whether it's religion, whether it's a particular religion, whether you're told that New Age, is the path and you've never read the Bible. Like, how can you have this is one of the things that for myself, I thought, how can I have an opinion on anything that I don't know first person? And for so long, I had an opinion on everything that I didn't know first person. Uh, I encourage everyone to have first person experiences with things that we have opinions on. Obviously, we don't need to kill someone to know killing someone's not bad, but I also have a first person experience on helping people live is better than taking someone's life. So my first person experiences doesn't have to be in the negative, it can be in the positive. But I just encourage so many people are stuck on third person experiences as their first person truth, and that doesn't serve them. And I don't think it serves society. It doesn't serve our families. Um, so I
It doesn't
appreciate it,
serve
brother.
God.
It doesn't serve. Ain't that the truth? That's right. There's a verse, Proverbs chapter 33, verse 32. It says, "For the froward are an abomination to the Lord." Froward being prideful, arrogant, unsubmissive, lack of humility. "For the froward are an abomination unto God, but his secret is with the righteous."
Hmm.
I always thought, man, that's so interesting. God has a secret and it's with the righteous meaning not of without sin, but right standing, to walk right and to walk in the light and walk in love and to walk in truth and walk in goodness. And like, man, God, what is your secret? And I think the secret is, I mean, I don't, there's probably way more to it, but the secret is that it's okay to go and seek.
Yeah.
David said, "Where can I go, Lord, where you are not there? If I go to the heights of heaven, there you are. If I go to the depths of hell, there you are." God is always with us. We don't have to be afraid. Isn't that how many times you see those memes? Like how many times does it say in the Bible? Probably I think 365 times, fear not, and
Yeah.
it's like, well, we don't have to be afraid of anything.
We do
So
not.
I love you, brother. How can people connect with you? Where are we sending people if they want to
Oh
talk to you?
man, honestly, I'm in a transition period right
Okay.
now. I
Okay.
was I was doing a podcast with a buddy of mine called Dudes Talking Freedom. We both recently moved, and I'm in between. We're building a little 2-acre homestead out in near Fort Worth, and
Awesome.
he's building a 11-acre homestead near Fort Worth, but we're still about an hour apart. So we're trying to figure out how to get that thing fired up again. But I mean, I don't really have a social media presence
Yeah,
because I kind of went away from that. I mean, I'm on social media, but I'm not,
no problem.
so
Well, if someone wants
um,
to get a hold of you, they can get a hold of me, and then I'll vet them.
yeah, I'm happy to. I'm
Okay.
happy to. I mean, if anybody, if I have I do have an Instagram. It's Jason Born in the USA, just like the movie,
Yeah.
and it's Jay Born in the USA on Twitter. But like I said, I'm not really super active, but I'm happy to take DMs and chat with anybody who wants to ask me more questions, or if you just want to troll, you can troll. That's cool.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you,
Mm.
brother. And let's do another one. I
Yeah,
love
let's do
this.
it.
Awesome.
Yeah, you bet.
Well, brother Jeremy, I love you. Thanks for coming on. Everyone, I'll put Jeremy's information in the show notes. You can check him out, follow him, connect with him, and we're going to do more episodes together. I think these type of conversations are needed. They're necessary. They're very real and honest. And at the end of the day, that's what it's about, understanding that we are not alone in this journey. No matter what people are experiencing with politics, the world, God is greater than politicians, than political systems, religious systems, pharmaceutical systems, medical systems, ideologies, idols. Um, all the things of this world are not greater than the divine plan that is moving forward. So find truth within yourself. Know that whatever makes you breathe more deeply is true. Whatever constricts your breath is not true. So keep working through this. I send you all love. I'm Lucas Mack. This is the Lucas Mack Show, and I'll talk to you on the next episode. Thank you for listening. If you're struggling to break free and need support, go to my website at lucasmack.com. There you'll find resources like videos and ebooks, and also information on how to work with me for coaching. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you soon.